Hey, what's up, everyone? We got a breaking BRAP rant regarding the ever-changing, ever-evolving, whatever you want to call it, Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard. And I got Hamp with me, so let's get into the details right now. All right, dude, I'm having some OBS issues, believe it or not, but we're live anyway. We're live, and hey, thanks everyone for joining us on this impromptu kind of breaking news BRAP rant. Data War says, "Wow, it's early." Yes, we are early. During the lunch break hour right now, which I'm using my lunch break to podcast quickly, and am joined by the one and only, especially Lee Hampton. What's up, Hamp?
Not much, man. Not much at all.
We got, this thing with Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft. I feel like this. It's always like a new. I feel like almost like on a weekly basis we're getting these new updates. We know about the. Clearly, everyone knows about the FTC's suit to block the Activision deal or acquisition by Microsoft. That happened last week, and so. Now we're hearing reports from Bloomberg. Bloomberg's reported that Microsoft has offered Sony the right to include Call of Duty within its PlayStation Plus subscription service. This is in addition to a deal that would guarantee Call of Duty coming to PlayStation, Nintendo, Steam platforms for at least the next 10 years. So we don't know. We really don't know. Kind of like we don't know. We don't know what that means. Like what they say the devil's in the details. We don't know what that offer to Sony having Call of Duty within PlayStation Plus subscription service, what Microsoft was looking to get in return, what Sony wasn't, because Sony hasn't obviously agreed to this deal, but what were some of the tipping points for Sony where they may have said, hey, you know what, we're not interested in Microsoft. We're just gonna see this thing out. So Ham, we since we last spoke last Thursday when we covered the breaking news, we're getting this little bit of morsels of information with things that Microsoft that we didn't know that Microsoft had offered to Sony to kind of sweeten the pot and appease regulators, concerns that the regulators have with this acquisition. But real quick, Hamp, I just want to make a quick commentary, Hamp. So it's I don't even know where to begin here. I would just caution everyone, and look, we appreciate anyone that listens and everyone that listens to this show. We do. But I would caution anyone using a podcast, not all podcasts. I would say there's some podcasts out there that are really informative from subject matter experts, people in the know. I would say, probably put a little more weight in those individuals. But I would also encourage you to do your homework, as they say, to go out there and research things and not just go off in particular podcasts that are more platform-centric podcast. And I say that because I heard a podcast the other week where the host, admittedly, Hamp, believe this or not, admitted to their his or her viewers that they did not have any, or his viewers, they did not have any business acumen. They didn't know business, but they were going to give you an opinion on business. And so I would say if you are going to not pump the brakes or say, wait a minute, this person just admitted to not having any business acumen, but they're going to give me an opinion based on business. Like I would advise that you probably do some more research. Question that individual and what they're saying, because really what they came off saying sounded like a piece that I would expect to hear on InfoWars.
I always trust the auto shop where as soon as I walk in, the person tells me, I'm not an expert on cars, but
yeah, exactly. Like you wouldn't go into an auto shop and work with a mechanic who said to you, "Hey, I'm not an expert in cars, but exactly." Or you wouldn't go to a doctor and the doctor say to you, "Hey, I'm not an expert in medicine, but yeah, I do know a thing or two about tacos." You know what I mean? Like, it's just
right. And all that's to say, look, I mean, all of us are out here on the gaming scene, rendering our perspectives on different things that are going on in the game, in games. Some podcasts talk about it from the gameplay perspective, but are clearly and admittedly not really experts on arts, or maybe not entertainment, right, as a critical category. There are some podcasts that attempt to cover business dynamics going on in the industry space, and just I think what that caveat provides is that should be your clue in that maybe the person's offering it from a certain perspective that may be wildly different than the leadership of the company that they're talking about, for instance, who's primarily concerned about returning maximum value to their shareholders, and doing things that they need to do to keep their business alive, and doing things that they need to do to compete on the marketplace, which, as I mentioned before, doesn't have any aspirations of emotion, attached to it, at least not at the rate as strongly as dollars, financial indicators, other key performance metrics that businesses watch. I've been in several boardrooms for large, small, medium-sized corporations, and never once has anybody brought up on the board, this is how the competition feels. That's not really a metric that's really tracked. We do things like we're doing competitive analysis.
You're saying there's no emotional graphs, tracking of emotional feelings on a whiteboard in a conference room then.
Yeah, there's no crying in gaming, in gaming business. So I mean, we look at the mentality of competitors. When we're trying to kind of outgame them, it's kind of tabletop game theory kind of thing, or black hat exercises, we often refer to them. If we do X, what is the other person going to do? So there's that. We try, we gain a semblance of whether or not a company has a lot of hubris, right? And if we can do something to kind of stick some bait out there that they'll go after, that type of thing. But again, as I've mentioned many times before, people overlay these mythological, ethical, and moral rubrics on top of corporate entities as if they are human beings. They are made up of human beings, but their motivations are not the same things that motivate us as individual people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. Like, this particular individual was, basically calling into question Jim Ryan's ethics, integrity, whatever the case is, and it's like, no, it's you as you mentioned, you don't understand business, and I don't know why. If you, I guess what kind of what's really weird to me is that the lack of awareness, that if you're admitting that you don't have any business acumen, then you shouldn't be commenting on things that are business related, because you're probably going to say things that are inaccurate. Well, no, not probably. You did say things that were inaccurate. You clearly don't understand how C-level executives operate within an organization. There's and if you've been following the industry as long as you claim to have, you would have seen this with Tim Sweeney, who had diarrhea of the mouth all over Twitter. And was, if I'm not mistaken, sharing emails between him and Phil Spencer, and his litigation with Apple. You would think that Apple was the worst corporation on planet Earth, the way Tim Sweeney was going on and talking about him, and talking about how he's pro-consumer. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is the behavior that you're seeing shouldn't surprise you. It's what these individuals are hired to do. You shouldn't be surprised by this behavior, because at the end of the day, their jobs are to protect the interests of the business or the companies they work for. If they don't do that, they're out of work. They're going to get fired. They'll be replaced with someone else who will step in and actually do that. So no one should be surprised by that, but no one should give. And honestly, Hap, like, I'm just at a point where I just don't have patience with this kind of stuff anymore. No one should really give that individual put any weight into what the individual's saying when they're clearly, admittedly, speaking from a place of ignorance, and then trying to have a conversation around a subject matter they just don't understand, and admittedly don't understand. And that's an issue I have. It's like, it's fine to talk shop, talk video games, but let's not go down the road of InfoWars and start putting out misinformation, disinformation because of your own ignorance and in the fact that you, even worse, you've admitted this prior to providing that opinion. So that's my quick rant.
Yeah, and it's, in the conversation we're having, right, is a matter of aligning. Is aligning a given voice track to intent, right? If you are going to talk about things you like as a consumer, right, and how you kind of align your purchasing habits, right, to your own personal notions of ethics and values, that's fully fine, right? The example I've talked about is how, during the Apple Samsung lawsuits, I felt like Apple took it too far. Like, I felt like Steve Jobs in his thing about going thermonuclear on Android, and then a lot of the things that the Apple legal team introduced during that lawsuit, I felt like went way over the top, and I felt were just disingenuous and just overly obnoxious. And so there was a period of time that I stepped away from Apple as a product base. Going into that trial, I had a MacBook. I had a MacBook Pro. I had the original iPhone. And during that time period, I said, nope, no more. I'm not buying any Apple products. And I stepped away from Apple until Tim Cook took over. And then I came back. But the difference is during that time, and I was a tech reviewer. I was reviewing mobile phones. I was reviewing tablets, things of that nature. When I was rendering my business opinion on what Apple was doing as a company and what their products were doing, those things were agnostic for my own personal feelings of kind of whether or not Apple was acting, in accordance with my own personal value set. If somebody came to me and said, hey, should I buy an iPhone or should I buy an Android handset? The recommendation that I would give to them is, well, it depends on what type of user you are. Certain types of users, your best bet is Apple. Certain types of users, your best bet is Android. I didn't say, well, Apple's a dishonest and dishonorable company, and you shouldn't buy anything from them, because that's the way I personally feel, right? I'm of Church X, right, school of thought and doctrine, and so if the purpose of your voice track, right, I guess I would say your content, although I'm not a huge fan of that term, if the purpose of your content is to convey to people your personal feelings. If it's a podcast about consumerism, about your personal feelings about, a product and how it aligns to your values, that's one thing. But if your purpose is to influence purchasing decisions of people, to sway their beliefs in what is going on in a business dynamic, in a business space, in a commercial endeavor within a given financial and economic ecosystem, then layering your own personal values and ethics into it, which by definition must have a skew and a bias, is misleading and disingenuous. The cautionary tale is, I guess, people should be concerned about, overly taking their cues from voice tracks that are vectored in that direction.
Yeah, that's a great point, Hap. I mean, it is disingenuous, and it's what we're trying to do here is trying to we are providing an alternate to that, where we're not looking to spread misinformation, disinformation. Like, that's just not what we try to do, or what we're doing here on the show. Hey, look, if we get it wrong sometimes, we'll admit it. We'll correct and then move on. But we're not gonna come up here and villainize companies, fanboy out, and spread misinformation, disinformation. There's a reason why Hamp's on the show, and I've said this to you, Hamp. You bring a level of expertise that I don't have. There's a reason why Forte's on the show. He has a level of expertise in retail that I don't have, and B Money with his insight into the industry, given the time that he spent with his God. Why am I forgetting the name? Oh my God, I just went blank with the podcast he was part of. He'll come to me later on, but we always joke around with B that he was going out to E3, making connections and interviewing people in the industry. Still having connections with those folks in the industry. He's got a certain insight, perspective to the industry that many of us don't have, because he does speak with those individuals who are working in the gaming industry, and then Slimmo with his technology background as well. So, there's, and even with some of our guests, we try to bring guests on that have perspectives or insight that we don't have based on their professional background. Like we had Agent Deli on this past week, and Deli's somebody who's worked in development in the gaming industry and continues working as a developer. So, but anyhow, that's my quick rant, Hamp. Anything else you want to add to
that? No. Was that your quick rant about that topic, or was that your quick rant overall?
That was my quick rant about that topic. But no, I do want to. Yeah, I do want to get to the Microsoft thing, because clearly, I was surprised by the offer. Again, we don't know all the details of the offer, but just to hear that Microsoft offered anything Call of Duty related to Sony for PlayStation Plus actually kind of surprised me a little bit. But I'm also not surprised that Sony has dug its heels and clearly has not accepted this deal. And it looks like we are in this for the long haul, Hamp. I mean, we're looking at the first hearing to take place August of 2023. So what does that mean for Microsoft in this deal, man? Because, we've talked a lot about this behind the scenes. I'm kind of 50-50 on this deal. I've had people ask me, do I think this is going through? I think it's 50-50, because I personally didn't think we were ready to get this to this point with this deal. But I am 50-50. I think if it does go through, there's going to be some clearly there's going to be some concessions, some things that Microsoft's going to agree to in order to make this thing happen, things that are going to benefit, not benefit, but things that, that are going to appease the FTC and some of their demands. We got Forte. What's up, Forte, by the way?
What is up, man? So listen, man, your boy be disappearing off the internet. He comes back. It seems like I always come back to Twitter and look at stuff and say, like, what happened? So Sony, so Microsoft, is this true? Is this real? Microsoft actually offered this?
Yeah, this is being reported by broke by Bloomberg and reported multiple outlets now that Microsoft offered this, and now we don't know like what that means and what the what kind of cut maybe Microsoft was getting. Like, clearly Microsoft's not going to offer anything. I don't think that's going to not benefit them, right? So yeah, it's wild, Forte. Like I said, this thing just like we all saw this yesterday, and we're all like, wait a minute, they did what?
But you know what this means, though. This is to say, like we talked about this ever since this announcement happened. The one thing we always brought up was people keep talking about Call of Duty. It's not about Call of Duty. Yes, Call of Duty is a major factor when it comes to getting people through your door. It's a good way to get casuals to pick the platform of choice when it comes to that. But that wasn't the reason that this deal was made. It was part of the reason, but the biggest part is getting into parts of the industry that you have no foothold into, which is King. And they don't want to lose that part of it. And if they are willing, if they're willing to give it on PlayStation Plus, their competitor, at this point, you're pretty much giving Sony almost everything they want outside of marketing rights of it, which they'll still continually have at least for the next 2 to 3 years, because that's how long that contract goes for. So that won't even affect them short term. Long term, it's another situation. But if you're talking about parity, you're releasing the game on multiple platforms, for the foreseeable future, at least up to that 10-year mark.
Yeah.
You're going to offer it in PlayStation Plus Premium, which is the same thing as Xbox Game Pass for the most part, outside of the Sony games not being in there day and date. And you're selling the game at the same price on both platforms. Where does Sony lose in that outside of 3 years from now they can't put the PlayStation logo at the end of a Call of Duty trailer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm telling you, this is literally just a move where they're saying, listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, the way that this seems, Microsoft is probably closer from dropping this deal than finishing it at this point. Because if they're doing concessions like this right now, this seems like an all-in or nothing move. It's like we already said they're willing to basically do anything to get to get this underneath their banner. And this is another move to do that. They're basically saying they're basically telling you value Call of Duty more than we do. We just value the company as a whole because they have something that we don't have. And they have a foothold into the mobile market that we would like to be a part of, on top of, still having more content and stuff for Game Pass. And if we have to basically tell you that we're going to put Call of Duty inside of PlayStation Premium at the moment that this happens, we're fine with doing that. And the other thing is, what else? What does that also open up? Does that also open up the opportunity for them to put it on Game Pass faster than they normally would have been able to do? They say, hey, we'll put it on PlayStation Premium, but it's not going to be 3 years from now. We'll do it day and date with the game, and we can also put it in Game Pass day and date with the game where it's complete parity across the board. There's a lot of different ways that this can go, so it could benefit Microsoft in the end, depending on if Sony actually agrees to something like that. But at this point, it just seems like Microsoft saying, listen, this is our last Hail Mary into trying to get this done before this $3 billion, we're already basically eating $2 billion. January 18th, we'll be eating $2.5 billion. To most people, they'll say, that's not a lot of money to Microsoft, but that's still a lot of money. That's still $500 million to $1 billion that you're giving up just for not getting this deal done. So this is really interesting, but I do think this might be the last thing that basically stops Microsoft from either going through with this or it actually going through.
So that's it. So basically, what you're saying, Forte, you think that they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at Sony because the end game for them is the mobile piece, right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
because that's what they're basically telling you. They're telling you that Call of Duty isn't the most important thing because guess what? If Call of Duty was the most important thing in this deal, there's no way that they would do something like this because that undercuts them. Like at that point you might as well just buy marketing rights because it's the same product everywhere. At that point, it's no different.
Yeah,
so
that's.
So it can't be the main focal point of this deal. This basically tells you it's not the main focal point of the deal anymore.
Yeah. No, I know, Forte, you've always said, and I think I think we've said this on the show too, and I know you said it quite a bit that that the King acquisition and people are so hyper focused on Call of Duty, but Call of Duty's not the biggest revenue generator for Activision Blizzard King. It's actually Candy Crush.
It just is when it comes to video games console sales and PC sales. Like when you look at those numbers, like I always hear people talk about how Call of Duty, how Activision with Call of Duty generates 25% of the revenue for gaming in a year. Yeah, but that's just for consoles. There's a bigger segment out there that does more than that, and that's the other segments of Activision Blizzard, mainly by King and what they do. So that's the direction that people need to pay attention to, and this basically speaks to that 100%.
You're going to pick up a game?
Yep.
Yeah. I guess Forte's at work. I heard you want to pick up a game. Hamp, what are your thoughts, man?
I mean, I think it's not my own original thought. I was on a podcast with Falky, David Faulkner this weekend, and I think he kind of nailed it. One of the things that it's likely that Sony is kind of taking into account in its view and its perspective on this is that anything that Microsoft offers, they offer out of goodwill, right? The next extension beyond that would be for Microsoft to put something in writing and to make it a contractual commitment. but even then, go-to-market strategies and partnering agreements and teaming agreements certainly don't have as much teeth as a judicial finding backed right by a judge. And so it's not totally outside the window of possibility that the way they're looking at it is that, if this thing goes to a regulatory agency, right, to have their decision made, and that regulatory agency takes it to court, as is the case with the FTC, either way, they get the agency requiring any given concessions that are decided, or they get a judge deciding on concessions that are decided. And even if the agency doesn't do that, they're not any more downside than they would have been if Microsoft does the things that they allege that they're suspecting they will do, or mirrors its course of action, that it took with the ZeniMax properties. So, I mean, I understand, right, the statistical odds that maybe Sony is playing against. I can see that theory for them deciding to play it that way. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. The thing I think you and I talked about earlier is, just with the action that the FTC has taken now, those things already have consequence, right? They're talking about not hearing it until August 2023. That puts the, end of June 2023 contractual agreement already at risk between Microsoft and Activision. It's totally possible that there's a clause in there that says, complete the deal by June 2023, provided that there is no, intervention by a government agency or a legal entity, right, and that there are allowances for that. And even if there aren't, those terms can always be renegotiated, right? But the problem, the risk that comes up is anytime somebody is making a second decision or hitting a second decision gate, third decision gate about a major business dealing that involves a lot of money, there's a potential that people will have their perspectives changed and people will be thinking about it differently. You go back to January at the beginning of this year, and you talk about where Activision was, right, with stock valued at $58, coming off of Vanguard not performing particularly well, coming off of the debacle of the Warcraft 3 remaster, all the problems that Activision had, all the Kotick, allegations and incriminations, all the workforce problems they were having. You flash forward to now, that perfect storm of problems isn't as extreme as it was a year ago. When the deal was announced, their stock lifted by about $20 from the high 50s to I think like the mid to high 70s. The stock then in the months following the announcement went up to I think the mid 80s to high 80s. It's floated back down to kind of the mid to high 70s right now. They're on a high of the greatest performance of any COD title that's ever been achieved with Modern Warfare 2. The Blizzard studios are doing better. They've tightened their belt by killing projects and killing studio efforts that were pointed in directions, quite frankly, other than COD and the Blizzard properties. So it's a different story now. And that just presents the risk that, if board members and other people have to reconsider this deal, in the summer of 2023, the optics on it may yield them to make different decisions or, not be as amenable to, whatever concessions and compromises were written into the contract the first time around.
Yeah, that's a great point, Hamp. Hold on a sec here. I'm sorry. I'm like multitasking right now. It's interesting. I said this earlier. I'm 50-50 on this deal closing. And real quick, we got Everboard Saga in here. And I'll give him the mic here in a sec. Hamp, I just, again, this is just my gut. I'm not saying this is fact or this is going to happen or that I have any inside knowledge. I'm just saying my gut. When I've looked at other deals, the longer things go on, the longer I think this deal may not happen. Like there's that saying, time kills deals. I know we talked about that the other day, Hamp. We see this with contracts. Contracts have expirations on them. I just feel like the longer this thing drags out, it probably, look, Sony's the biggest protester. It probably benefits them. But I want to get Everborn Saga here real quick, who Want to jump in. Everborn, are you there, man? Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, man. Thank you for jumping in, man. Sorry to get back to you right away on DM. I didn't see. I just happened to pull up my phone for something else. It's like, oh, I got DM. But anyhow, thanks for jumping in, man.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything Hamp was saying, and I only heard what Forte was saying. I agree there as well. For me, in terms of likelihood of the deal going through, I actually don't put a lot of weight on what the FTC did, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I really think this is going to come down to how hard the CMA says they are for or against the deal in January, because I don't think Microsoft fights this on two fronts, right? I think they can handle one fight if that's what the FTC and everybody that I've listened to, and I'm not talking about the Twitter financial analysts, right? I'm talking about, I watch CNBC not that like CNBC is the end all be all, but I'm saying a lot of people that have spoken about this, like former FTC chairs, have said the case looks weak on the FTC's behalf. And this is part of the reason they're using their administrative judge, because a federal judge might not look as kindly. And even their own administrative judges have thrown out some recent cases that they've brought. And I also don't put a lot of stock on the fact that there's no preliminary injunction, because I see a lot of people running with that. But a judge is not going to give you a preliminary injunction if the deal is not eminently closing. So I think if Microsoft can secure something with concessions with the CMA and the EU, I'm not sure how detrimental China is in terms of whether they move forward or not, but I think the EU and the CMA are the ones they're looking at. If they can get those guys to agree, I think that Microsoft closes the deal, or let me back up a second. If they get those two things, that will force the FTC's hand, and the FTC will now either need to risk Microsoft closing without their consent or file for a preliminary injunction, which means they'd have to put their argument in front of a federal judge. The risk there, again, as several former FTC chairs have said, is that they don't appear to have a strong case, the FTC. So the FTC and via Lena Khan would risk putting in front of a judge and throwing out the whole thing, or giving Microsoft the ability to close. And I think that's the path to this closing. But I agree, if we're talking about the case not starting or Microsoft not able to present its case to a judge until August, then that could take another 6 to 8 months. And then even if the judge rules in Microsoft's favor, because it's an administrative judge within the body of the FTC can appeal their own judge's decision and then drag it out for another year before Microsoft gets in front of a federal judge. So to me, I see Microsoft's only path to closing this thing as going through the EU and CMA, and then closing it or forcing the FTC's hand to get it in front of a federal judge. Because I think they close it and fight it, with the FTC later if they can get the other approvals. In terms of, sorry, go ahead. Somebody was going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, I hear everything you're saying, and I do agree with everything you're saying. At this point, I just feel like
you might as well just say, with all due respect, Forte.
No.
That's what it sounds like, Forte.
I don't know.
With all due respect.
I don't listen to anything anyone says before the word but.
Nothing,
so you gotta...
It ain't got nothing to do with what he's saying. This is more of a thought on just the whole proceeding as it is right now. If this is true, what Microsoft just basically said they're doing, or they're willing to do when the deal goes through, Sony has been putting up this fight from the very beginning, talking about what it would be like to not have Call of Duty. Every time every time a conversation about it being taken away in a certain way, first it was Nintendo's not part of this industry when it comes to this. It's just Microsoft and Sony. Well, Microsoft went out and made made PlayStation a part of this. They got it. Then they had the part, well, if it goes into Game Pass, then we want to get console parity when it comes across to actually being on our thing, because that could definitely severely hurt our player base because we can't compete on that list. Well, now we're going to offer it this way. Then Microsoft came out and said, guess what? All of our games going forward are going to be $70 going forward. So not even then, the cheaper price doesn't matter anymore. And then and all the FTC and EC and all these different regulators kept saying is, this would severely hurt PlayStation's ability to compete when it comes to Call of Duty. But I'm just asking, if Microsoft takes all of those concessions away, what is the argument that Sony can put up for this to continue? Because the only reason that they're fighting this as much as they are is because Sony is fighting it as much as they are. We're not saying that they still won't, as a regulatory body, still oversee it to make sure it's fair for everyone, not just Sony. But I think the biggest problem that they have done is they made this mostly about Sony. They didn't make this about everybody else. They made this about Sony.
But my thing is the FTC has not done that, right? The CMA.
The FTC is different. The FTC is different. You're right.
So the CMA has talked a lot about how it impacts Sony, but the FTC has not. And I think the very key thing is all the things that you mentioned. To me, again, solely looking at this from a quantitative base, right? What you said was every challenge that Sony, the individual company, has put on the table, Microsoft has made an effort to take off the table. And that's great in terms of a neutralization strategy for Sony. It does nothing for how the FTC is looking at the case and its impact across the wider industry. And so one of the things that's gonna come up, and that I think that's gonna shape the optics through which they're viewing it, is if Call of Duty, which is a gravimetric force on the industry, right, now sits underneath the Microsoft umbrella, how do mid-size, small-size, independent developers make a PvP, multiplayer, online, competitive shooter in the business space, which has a heavy requirement on cloud-based infrastructure, a heavy reliant dependence on server infrastructure, on communications lines, et cetera, a heavy dependence on O&M, right, site reliability, data centers, et cetera. How does somebody pull off something like Hyperscape? Right, and I think that's going to be the thing that weighs on their mind.
Then I'm just going to ask. Even if this deal doesn't go through, they still have to deal with that because Call of Duty is not going anywhere.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like,
Call of Duty is not going anywhere. It's not like they're saving Call of Duty. It just happened to be a situation that popped up where Microsoft was able to take advantage of a situation that was happening at Activision, and the stock price dropped like crazy. And they were able to swoop in and say, hey, we want to purchase the company. And Activision would just happen to be in the mindset that is probably the best deal that they could go with. But even if that didn't happen, you still have to compete with Call of Duty. It's not like it was going anywhere.
Right, but you don't have to compete with a Call of Duty that has zero cloud infrastructure costs because all of that is being borne by the corporation that owns them. You don't have a Call of Duty that is standing independent, right, catering to two heavyweight competitors, Microsoft and Sony, and playing those sides against each other. You don't have the alignment of in a business that can engage in loss leader strategies, which is the key thing that trips your anti-competitive meter, right? So you just don't have that alignment. I'm not saying that you don't have any challenge at all, but our favorite term that's been thrown around, you don't have them aligned with a corporation that has the capability to crowbar those adjacencies and strengths in other market segments and an immense financial weight into foreclosing other competition.
So really quick, I just want to shout out to the $11 word, which is gravimetric. I appreciate that.
That's a good word.
The second thing is I think I'm on Forte's side of it, where how far off are we from the same scenario in the counterfactual? But I think the biggest, for me anyway, I think the biggest hurdle Microsoft faces with as it relates to the FTC is that the FTC just doesn't believe them, right? So Microsoft can make any concession, they can make any offer to alleviate the concerns of the FTC. What good is that if they don't believe you?
Yeah, right. let me modulate your comment just one skosh. The biggest challenge Microsoft faces in the FTC is the size of Lena Khan's balls. Yes. That's Microsoft's uphill battle, and that is an unshakable, immovable force which they're playing chicken with, which is not going to flinch.
Well, hold on,
real quick, just to piggyback. I'm sorry, everyone. Just to piggyback what Hamp just said. I mean, this isn't just about people are focused on Lena Khan going after Microsoft big tech, but it's also about shaking up precedents. Like vertical mergers, acquisitions have always been voted on favorably and really haven't had the level of scrutiny that somebody like for example the Sprint T-Mobile merger wasn't that
it was a Sprint multiple mergers, right? Because there were attempts for SoftBank to take them over, for Sprint, for AT&T to take them over, for T-Mobile went after that merger twice and finally got it through.
Yeah, so those kind of deals where competitors have acquired another competitor in the same space, those kinds of mergers, acquisitions have been heavily scrutinized. And what she's been saying and kind of her philosophy is like, well, wait a minute, like, those vertical mergers, acquisitions that we've kind of, let through the front door with not a lot of scrutiny, those mergers can potentially have negative impacts to consumers and competition as well. And that's kind of, you mentioned the big balls. That is part of what we're seeing here, and the challenge, if you will, to revisit these precedents that were set years ago and say, well, wait a minute, maybe it's time for us to revisit those things because there could be consequences to consumers and competition. And instead of just letting those deals go through, maybe we should reevaluate. And that is part of, and from what I've been reading, part of what her thought process is as well.
Let me ask this because I got to get ready to go. But one question I want to ask is, what's the percentage of regulators that have to approve and let this deal go through for it to go through?
As I've heard about it, they need the EU, the UK, and the US. Those are the ones that are
they need all three of those.
Yes, those are specifically mentioned in the merger agreement that they have to at least have those.
Yeah,
and the one thing I wanted to last thing I wanted to agree when it came to what Everborn said is I think that's the biggest thing I really think he had right on point is them doing the deals that they have really goes to, and you talked about it too, Hamp, where they came off and said, hey, let's eliminate all of the issues that Sony has with this. And that also goes in line with when it goes to the CMA and everything, what they've been saying, because they've been the ones that's been defending that the most. So I think they're trying to eliminate them one by one. And I do think Everborn was right. It just comes down, they know the FTC is going to be the hardest. So let's get these other ones taken care of, and we'll deal with the FTC as we have to when it comes to this merger and acquisition. Because I think these moves have something to do with just making the fight a little bit more attainable for them versus it being like a fight on all fronts.
So going into this, I think the consensus for many people who were talking about this was that the FTC would be the easiest, with the EU and the CMA being the most difficult, given how hard the EU, the CMA have already been with big tech. I mean, has anyone said that has paid any attention to anything Lena Khan has ever said?
Well, I
was watching the Amazon case with MGM, and I was like, she's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think people who have given that opinion have given that opinion based on historical precedent in those geopolitical regions, and haven't ascribed like the specific Lena Khan dynamic, right, to them. I mean, you remove her from the equation, I would say the same thing, right? That again, given that the fact that this country has approved 132 billion, 182 billion, like massive vertical integrations with Verizon, Comcast, NBC, Universal, Time Warner, AT&T, right? That's been the precedent. I would have said that's what history shows as well, right? That this is going to go through in the U.S. But then when you look at the EU and the CMA, where like all of big tech has had $1.4 billion multi-million penalties imposed. Google chased out of, Google incentivized to pull out of France for several years, right? I would have said that the same thing, that's where their problems are going to lay. And, it would have been easier over here. But the Lena Khan thing, I mean, I was not expecting, as hard as I thought it was going to be, because I have been watching the Lena Khan thing, I did not expect the FTC to drop the lawsuit. I did not expect them to drop the lawsuit this early. I thought that there was going to be a longer period of back and forth between the FTC and Microsoft. That one report in the Washington Post, which people haven't made a big deal of, I don't hear it being brought up in conversations. It's amazing and telling, and it's significant to me that Microsoft and the FTC supposedly went into a room right the day before the lawsuit dropped and had a big come to Jesus meeting. And the result of that meeting was they both walked away. Microsoft did a bunch of stuff to try and secure some last minute partnerships. But the FTC took off from there and turned around and dropped the lawsuit, which means what that tells me is if that happened, individuals went into a room, things probably got very heated. But at a minimum, there was an impasse and there was a lack of an ability to come to a compromise or an agreement. And the venue was set for that to happen, and the opportunity was there for that to happen. But you had two sides that met and could not find a point of compromise.
So the other thing I want to say is, if the goal of the FTC a Lena Khan led FTC is to tamp down or have a chilling effect, as they say, on these kinds of deals, whether you can do it, by straight up getting it denied, which again, a lot of people think the case is not super strong, or you can just do it by having sort of the process be the penalty, as they say, meaning you just get the deal blocked because you have them bogged down in, administrative things where you're pushing the court date out, you're doing it in your own court, so they'll have to be, dealing with this for at least 2 years before they can have it in front of a federal judge. Because and that is what gets the deal killed. You've still killed the deal, right? Because most people or most companies, when they're faced with this kind of opposition, they walk away from the deal, and even though they potentially could have won in court, because you have to look at what are the legal expenditures, how long do the relevant parties want to stay in limbo, right? We've heard people say Microsoft can't even, I mean, this could just be incompetence, but there are people that say Microsoft's 2022 was so lackluster because they didn't want to appear strong. How the Activision shareholders, how long do they want to be in limbo off of this? And that is in light of, a lot of analysts are saying they're recommending Activision as a buy, whether or not the deal goes through, right? Because their fundamentals are there. So they do run a risk of this. You've said this already, but the longer this plays out, the higher the risk of it not closing. So I think that's really the goal on the FTC side, because I do think they created a market, right, in their filing for this. The FTC, I mean, like high-end console markets. I don't think that's a thing. I don't think you can ignore Nintendo just because it's convenient for your argument. And I think obviously Microsoft's lawyers will argue that, but is a judge going to believe them, right? That this specifically is a market. And for me, and Hamp, this because we went a little back and forth. Not really us. We both linked to some documentation, and then the community did what it does. It went crazy with it. But to me, I found it very telling that the FTC cited assurances that they claim Microsoft made to the EU when closing the ZeniMax deal, as opposed to citing assurances that were made to the US, because they would have that info, right? Why cite an assurance from another jurisdiction when you could have cited your own? And that tells me they are putting whatever they can in this complaint and then obviously it'll be adjudicated later. But to me, it reads like they'd have an uphill battle. So I don't know, but like I say, I think we really should be just paying attention to the CMA. I think the CMA is going to be the decider of this deal. And if they come out in January and say we don't like, we're just blocking it like we did to Facebook, then the deal's dead. One thing I should note though, a representative from the CMA was speaking at a public engagement or whatever, and they talked about how people thinks that they are favoring one side or the other, and they're saying we're not doing that. And they say if you think we're targeting big tech, in the last I don't know how many years, there've been over nearly 100 mergers that we've reviewed, and the Facebook Giphy deal is the only one we've moved to block. Right? So I think a lot of people think like, the CMA is doing Sony's bidding. I don't know that I would say that, because if you look at the way they speak when they first raise concerns to anything that they review versus how when they go to their phase twos, you see that they may sound like they're really against the deal. Then they get to the phase two and they're like, oh, now that we looked at the data, actually this isn't an issue, right? Or actually these concessions were offered to us and we took them. So I'm not one of those people who thinks the CMA is doing Sony's bidding. I'm not necessarily sure that they're just going to outright block the deal. So to me, I think if you're a fan of this deal or you think it should go through, watch the CMA in January. What do you guys think?
I mean, it'll
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. It'll be interesting to see what the CMA does. I think I've personally felt along this timeline that the CMA is motivated to be first to get its decision out, because I personally believe they have a vested interest in kind of showing that they're wearing their big boy pants now and are not subordinate to the EU, and may not want to have their decision come out after the EU and have it potentially look like they're kind of parroting or copying whatever the EU said. That being said, I've also felt that their decision would therefore be the most conservative. But we'll see. I agree that I've never felt that the CMA was being unduly biased against big tech, but I do feel that geographically, the UK, the European Union do have a commerce culture that naturally aligns them in opposition to the Big Five, because they have. They have a commercial system that doesn't necessarily lend itself as easily to things like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, rising within their own systems. And so because of that, they now have a situation where those American companies come over there, throw their weight and their financial strength around, and the EU and the CMA now are incentivized to do things to make sure that their own indigenous companies have the ability to compete, right? Even though they don't have that strength. So I think there's some natural things which cause that dynamic, without them necessarily needing to be like exclusive, implicitly biased towards Microsoft. So we'll see. The way I've been predicting it the whole time is that the CMA would come out with the most conservative judgment. The EU would be a little more lenient. I was expecting the FTCs to be kind of aligned with the EU in terms of kind of the strength of their settlement, of their decision, and what Microsoft would be required to do. I felt Microsoft would come to some compromise with the FTC and the EU, and then would backtrack to the CMA and say, look, your two big brothers, right, agreed to this. Can you guys go ahead and meet us on the same playing field instead of, holding your last piece of, whatever else you have, out in the extremity. And that maybe the CMA would agree to that.
I think that happens the other way around. I think they're going to say, hey, you said you can't trust us because of what we told the EU. Well, the EU trusts us, right? Meaning if the EU approves the deal based on whatever concessions are offered. So they're basically going to have to say, get the approval from the EU and the CMA, and then go to the FTC and say, come on, right?
Yep. I mean, it could unfold that way. The thing that kind of sticks in my mind now, though, is, as I've mentioned before, Microsoft recently got their hands slapped in the EU for upcharging on Office 365 to people who didn't run that enterprise solution on Azure.
They're about to do a settlement for Teams, I heard, because the EU's looking at something that they're doing with Teams right now, and I think they're going to offer either some settlement fee or make some behavioral concession to the EU because of some shady business going on with Teams.
Yeah, so it's tough to call. And another thing is, as BRAP has mentioned, right? Those three agencies flew to, I don't know if it was in Brussels or somewhere, but those three agencies flew and had a summit to, as far as we can tell, I think, harmonize, right, their strategies about what they were doing about this specific acquisition, but overall in general, how to contend with big tech, right, globally, in their individual countries. So, and the one thing I'll mention is I absolutely hear what you're saying about, the previous FTC chairs and other people. What I'll say is what I've read is, as I look at the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Seeking Alpha, is that financial analysts, right, who have been asked on how they think this deal is going to go are pretty much evenly split as far as whether or not the deal will go through. Some, with sizable portfolios, calling it 30%, right, that it'll go through. So I don't know that there's universal agreement by people in various domains who would have expertise to weigh in on it, that the FTC doesn't have a strong case. And the other thing you mentioned, I'll just wrap up with this. The other thing you mentioned, I absolutely agree. My whole point is, I don't think that there's this feeling that the FTC needs to win the case in court to win and achieve their goals, and I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to come in at. The deal going through and the FTC having a strong case can be, mutually exclusive of one another, right? The whole point is this impediment to the deal and the time it would take to adjudicate it could kill the deal in and of itself, right, whether or not Microsoft would win.
The just a quick historical data point. So the last time, right, Microsoft had to do this dance with the U.S. That case which was filed by the DOJ. Was filed in 1999, and that case was in litigation for 2 years with a decision not made till 2001.
Oh, by the way, and the initial decision there, which Microsoft appealed, was that Microsoft would have to break up the operating system and software parts of their company. That was the initial ruling, but Microsoft, I believe, appealed it, and that's why they didn't get broken up.
They did. They appealed it, and the Supreme Court ruled that the decision was overturned, but that the findings of fact stood. And so when the case went back to the circuit court for a ruling, basically the trial phase of that litigation, they basically picked up at what I would call the equivalent of the sentencing point, right? All the findings were considered good to go. It's just that the judges and other parties involved then had to make a decision based off of what had been found during the litigation.
Yeah, and that's why I think, though, if they get the other regulatory approvals, Microsoft has to go ahead and close unless they're legally barred by that whole preliminary injunction process. Because I don't think Activision will want to stay in limbo. And then the question is, can they even do that? Because we talked about earlier, they need approvals from these three regulatory jurisdictions. So will they have to wait, right? So that's a whole thing. The other thing, because BRAP, I know you wanted to wrap up, and I didn't. The reason I wanted to come on is because we were talking about the whole COD and PS Plus offer. I'm just waiting for the next concession to be that PlayStation gets COD exclusively for like a year, right? but I think that offer, we don't know the details of it. Are they saying they would get COD on day one? And would PlayStation or Sony uh, even want it in in PlayStation Plus, because they don't see the value of spending the money for their own games. Meaning, there's production costs and the upside on box sales or boxed and digital sales are higher than what they estimate they'll get in subscriptions. This is why they don't do their own games in day one. I would imagine that Microsoft wouldn't be giving them COD for free. So would Sony, who doesn't have a strong belief in like day one in subscription services, would they even want to pay what it would cost to get COD in their service?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, I'm sorry, I'm multitasking right now. No, I think, look, I think if it doesn't benefit them for them financially, they're just not going to agree to it. Like, I think that's probably the obvious here, that they, whatever it is, needs to benefit them in some kind of financial way. And if it doesn't, they're probably, in my opinion, not going to agree to it. I think that's my guess, is the 10-year deal. And a lot of us were like, well, why would they take 10 years? Well, there may be something in that 10-year deal that just doesn't make sense for them financially, and may reduce some kind of, revenue intake they get from COD. And so they may say, you know what, that's not good enough for us.
But here's the thing, right? They're getting traction with regulators. Why would they agree to it, right? It's not like the regulators so far see, and I'm not saying they're like doing Sony's bidding, but the regulators are pushing back. We've seen one major regulator move to actually block the deal. We've seen strong language from the CMA. The EU is going to phase 2. China did not agree to the simplified filing. So right now, the wind is at Sony's back in terms. So there's a very real possibility that they can get the deal blocked. And when I say they're getting it's regulators that are blocking the deal, but regulators are reaching out to market participants and asking who would be harmed. And we see that, at least not that we've heard, there are any like major publishers that are arguing against it. We know Nintendo isn't arguing against it. We know Valve isn't arguing against it. So maybe Apple and Google, I don't think Apple's arguing against it. I don't think Apple cares. But maybe Google or Amazon's arguing against it. But we haven't heard any of that. So again, like Hamp says, going by what we can prove, it's only really Sony. And so if regulators have to prove that there will be a harm to the market or competition, and Sony's the one complaining, that's why you're going to hear those things. It's not really that they're doing Sony's work. This is a major market player that is saying that they will be foreclosed, so they have to do this work, and that's just what it is. So I get how it looks, but they're not doing Sony's work, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, it does. I mean, yeah.
So, but really, I just don't see any world where Sony agrees to anything unless Microsoft starts sort of racking up closes around the world, and the close no close tips in favor of close of the deal. Then you'll start seeing Sony come around like, hey, is that a 10-year offer still on the table? But right now, there's no reason to.
Yeah, gentlemen, I actually need to hop on a call, but I do want to continue this conversation more. Unfortunately, I just don't have enough time to do it right now. But no, I wanted to first of all, I want to thank everyone in the live chat for coming by. This is some Prop 2 BRAP rant. I appreciate you all coming by, hanging out with us this afternoon, and thank you, Everborn, for hopping in as well, man. I appreciate it as well.
Thank you for letting me come in last minute. But
absolutely,
but that's
man.
The next thing. COD exclusive on PlayStation.
COD exclusive. No. If that happens, I'm going to be like, I'm going to have to get you back on the show. But
hey, BRAP, can I mention one other thing about Everborn? Hey, so I just want to, we talk a lot about on the show about the ability to engage in spirited debate with other gamers, even though you may have disagreements and even though you may have different perspectives. And so I just want to give Everborn a shout, right? And again, talk to people, and maybe if you want, right, look at the exchanges he and I have been having on Twitter. you haven't seen the stuff he and I have talked about in DM, right? We have gone tooth and nail over this topic. Very convinced about the artifacts that we're looking at and the facts of the case. We have managed to keep it civil. It has gotten heated a few times, right? But on each occasion, we have each agreed to come back to the table and maintain our friendship, right? And that, to me, is the thing that we need to start focusing on as important within the gaming community, right? That ability to discuss these topics, remain civil, right? Keep in brotherhood and sisterhood with each other, right? And move forward, regardless of what everybody's particular likes, dislikes, or perspectives are.
Hey, you know why? Because you guys are not. You know why? Because you guys don't take this gaming thing personal. You don't take this like it's like, oh my God, fight to the death. No, you discuss it because it's a really good discussing point, and you like having the conjecture with each other, like most people do. Humans like to communicate and talk to each other. But when people take it too far, is because they're fanning over something that they shouldn't have to be fanning over, especially when it's not benefit you. So I definitely give you guys a kudos for that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. There's not enough Microsoft stock in my portfolio for me to get upset about this stuff. But I will say, if agreement is a prerequisite of your friendship, then you are not friends.
That is that is a great point, Everborn. I mean, and this is the kind of dialogue that we try to promote here on this show, because there just isn't enough of it. It's like, you don't have to agree, but I think the idea of being open to other opinions, other thoughts is important, and just not enough of that. And unfortunately, a lot of people's identities, their YouTube brands, are tied to plastic boxes, and that gets lost in the conversation, unfortunately. So, no, I mean that's why it's it's something that we try to promote here on the show, and I think one thing I've seen the last couple of weeks in the live chat here. There's been some good dialogue here too on BRAP in the live chat. I mean, there was a time where we would get those console warriors that would come in here and kind of hijack the chat a little bit. But I think over the last couple of weeks, what's really impressed me is that, look, there's been some good dialogue in the live chat. So I want to just shout that out too, because I've seen other shows where it's just like, yeah, that's like console war central, and that's not what happens in this live chat for the most part. But no, thank you everyone again, the live chat, for coming by and hanging out with us. And Everboard, thank you again. We got to pull your 3080 though, because you don't use it. And Forte, man, I know your work, man.
I played on that was Cyberpunk back in 2020. That's the last game I played on.
Oh man. But Forte, thank you again, man. I know you're at work, man, so appreciate you hopping in, man. It's always a pleasure. And Hamp, thanks for
appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So Hamp, thank you again, man, for joining. I know you all are busy, so I certainly appreciate the time. But we'll be perhaps going to be back next. I almost said next Wednesday. Perhaps going to be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So we have some topics we're going to discuss as relates to the Video Game Awards, the results of that show, and some other gaming related topics. But we'll catch you all tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you again.